The fall season is officially here. I don't know about you, but I always feel like reading more in the fall. I don't know what it is. There is something unmistakably magical about the fall season that just makes it the perfect time to pick up a good book. As the days are growing shorter and it's getting cooler outside and the leaves turn shades of gold and crimson, it just kind of feels like nature is inviting you to slow down a little bit and to seek comfort in those cozy corners. Whether it's curling up under a blanket with a cup of tea, or you're warming up by the fire, listening to the wind whistle, or you're going for a walk and inhaling that autumn crisp air and listening to an audiobook, it's just the perfect atmosphere for introspection. The best time to read books that are more mysterious, that have maybe themes of reflection or transformation, or maybe they're even a little bit spooky, but of course they also have to be cozy. This whole video is going to be focusing on cozy fantasy recommendations. I will be making another video a little later this month where I'm going to talk about the more spooky and scary recommendations. So why don't you grab yourself a cup of tea, a pumpkin spice latte, a Capri Sun, whatever you drink. I'm not gonna judge you. Don't be an alcoholic though, okay? Don't drink and drive. You're not driving right now, are you? You better not be driving and watching this video. Today I'm gonna be recommending the coziest fantasy books to read during autumn. During the fall. What am I trying to say? Now, some of you might know I am a judge for SPFBO this year, and SPFBO is the self-published fantasy blog-off that's hosted by Mark Lawrence. I've been making my way through all 30 books that I have to read, and I have found some incredible books so far. It's been really hard to kind of narrow it down, but I have a few that I'm trying to decide which one is going to be my finalist. But one of those ones that I'm deciding on happened to make it onto this list. And I'll tell you which book it is in a little bit, but this video is actually sponsored by Wraithmarked Creative. With permission from Mark Lawrence, Wraithmarked Creative has launched a project designed to ideally provide every current and future SPFBO champion with a themed special edition, which over time is going to add to this cohesive display across the dust jackets. And while these are not official SPFBO editions, they are designed to add to each other over time, forming a linked connection. Now, their current project features ML Wong's The Sword of Kaigen, which is one of my favorite standalone fantasy books ever, as well as Rob J. Hayes' Where Loyalties Lie, which, as you can see, they already complement each other side by side on the shelf. They look amazing. I'm gonna be backing this like right away myself because I'm a big supporter of SPFBO, and I think it would be amazing to have a shelf with all the champions books on them, especially if it's like such a cohesive and beautiful design. Now, they do mention they can't reveal who the two 2025 projects are going to cover, which authors they're going to cover, but they do have permission from both parties already, and they have permission for the 2026 projects as well. So as you can see, this is going to be like a long-term project. I'm so excited for it. And these are completely custom from top to bottom, including the interior layout. They already have 250,000 raised within 4 days, and if they reach 400,000 raised, then we're also getting illustrated page edges with some of the characters from the books. And guys, if we can make this a really strong campaign for Wraithmarked Creative, then future campaigns are just going to be even stronger, and I'm so excited to see SPFBO get the recognition it deserves like this. I'll have a referral link in the description. Make sure to check it out. And a huge thank you to Wraithmarked Creative for sponsoring the video. Moving on to my cozy comfort autumn read recommendations. The first one I want to mention is one of those books I actually had to read for SPFBO, and it's one of my favorite ones that I have read out of the bunch so far. It's definitely up there as a contender for my finalist, but I have like a handful of ones I'm trying to choose from right now. But this one is is basically fantasy comfort food, and that is Stone and Sky by Z.S. Diamante. Now, when I say it's a cozy fantasy, I don't mean that it has low stakes or low action. This has a lot of action. It's got high stakes. This is epic fantasy, but it's comfort in the way that it's a callback to like traditional classic Tolkien-esque fantasy. It has orcs and elves, and it's got a battle of good versus evil. And sometimes I just get a craving for that classic fantasy, especially when it's done well, and Stone and Sky is one of the best like classic fantasies I have read in a long time. And I also really appreciate how this is a clean fantasy. There is a lot of epic battles in it, but it doesn't focus on the violence. It doesn't have a bunch of cursing and sex scenes and whatnot, which makes it so that I can recommend it to anybody. Like I can recommend this to my nephew if I want, and I really appreciate that because sometimes it can be difficult recommending certain adult fantasy series to like your friends and family, and Z.S. Diamante did this on purpose because he has kids and he wanted his kids to be able to read his books and enjoy them as well. And that's something I respect so much, and I feel like it's refreshing to see that in fantasy. So in this old school fantasy, we got griffin riders, we got orcs riding wyverns, we got magic, and we got a lot of adventure. Some of the characters we follow include Orin, the griffin rider, and he's the first character we meet, and he kind of serves as the story's anchor. After a devastating battle, he's separated from his comrades, and Orin's quest to return to Whitestone is kind of a classic fantasy journey. His adventure alongside characters like Alaria, Azel, and Cole embody that timeless quest trope, and their camaraderie is such a joy to follow. I really enjoyed the secondary characters in this book as well. And I'm kind of sensing a bit of a romance that's growing here between Orin and one of the characters, so I'm really excited to see where this goes in future books. And then another character that immediately caught my attention was Karnak the Orc. I was kind of surprised when we got his perspective, because we've been following like humans for the most part, and then it switches over to the orc's perspective. And I was kind of assuming that I wouldn't be rooting for this character, but considering that I played Horde on World of Warcraft for years, I should have assumed there's a separate story coming from this side, and we can also relate and like these characters as well. And Karnak is such a great character. The history between humans and orcs is central to the story, and through Karnak's eyes, we see a fierce dedication to his people and to his family and honor. But he does an excellent job at giving us that outside perspective where he pits these two groups against each other, and we feel like we should root for one, but then we can end up sympathizing with both of them because we get both of their perspectives, and it just makes this really compelling conflict in the story. Anyways, if you want a classic, just comfort food fantasy, then you should read Stone and Sky. I'm actually going to be starting on the second book as soon as I'm done with everything I need to read for SPFBO. Next is one you might not have been expecting, and that is the Chronicles of Prydain by Lloyd Alexander. Not many people talk about this series anymore. It is a children's classic that I still think holds up really well, and more people need to read these books. And the reason I feel like it's suitable for the autumn is because I mean, it's got the Horned King. It's very much got some spooky vibes in there. I actually didn't really read these until I was quite a bit older, but I did grow up watching The Black Cauldron, the Disney adaptation, and for a while that was actually one of my favorite Disney movies just because of how creepy it was and just the fantasy elements. At the time, I was reading Del Toro Quest, and I was thinking how amazing it would be if they made a book of The Black Cauldron. Little did I know they do have a book of The Black Cauldron, and I just didn't hear about this series until much later. I actually don't own the second one, so hopefully I can find a copy at some point. Now, if you're looking for the perfect blend of like dark, whimsical, gothic atmosphere with a bit of romance, then you need to check out One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. This was actually a recent read for me, and the audiobook I would recommend checking out. That's what I listened to, and it was really good. Now, this book surprised me because I don't typically read romance-focused novels because I like romance in books. I just don't like it when the romance is the entire plot. And thankfully, this book, it has more to the plot than just the romance. And it actually has a very interesting plot. I mean, the premise alone is what got me interested in checking this book out. Set in the misty, foreboding kingdom of Blunder, the novel follows Elspeth, a young woman infected with a magical fever that leaves her harboring an ancient, menacing spirit called the Nightmare within her mind. The kingdom itself is haunted by a mystical fog where magic comes with a heavy price. There's these Providence cards, which is a system that grants powers with grave consequences. And as Elspeth struggles for control over this nightmare in her mind, she's also trying to cure the village from this dark magic that's infecting it. And the story's eerie setting, coupled with that kind of dark fairy tale quality, I think makes it a perfect read for the fall. I will say, as much as I liked the atmosphere of the setting here, how it kind of feels gothic in nature. I will say the world building is pretty light. I do wish there was a bit more depth there. I always love those tropes in gothic literature of like crumbling castles and misty villages and spooky haunted forests. That's something I always enjoy seeing. I do wish this just had a little bit more depth, but it does do a pretty good job at nailing that kind of gothic atmosphere, and really that eerie setting and dark fairy tale aspects make it perfect for reading in the fall. And next up, we have Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. Now you might think it's an odd choice for me to recommend this on the list. After all, it's set in an endless indoor labyrinth, and the fall is like the most beautiful season there is, and it's full of color. But hear me out, okay? Autumn is all about cozy vibes. When it comes to literature, you especially feel cozy when you're reading a nice mystery novel that's incredibly atmospheric. Piranesi is exactly that. This book is so atmospheric, and it has a really nice mystery to it. Even though I found the mystery to be a little bit predictable near the end, I still found it to be so compelling, and this is a very atmospheric novel. The setting alone had me hooked. It subverts and it confuses and it draws you in deeper and deeper into the story of Piranesi. Piranesi, although that's not his name, dwells in the house, a vast labyrinth of halls, vestibules, and statues, and an ocean with tides that occasionally flood the lower and middle floors. Now, the only other dweller of the house is the Other, a friendly but curt man who warns Piranesi that a newcomer has entered the house, threatening destruction and chaos. Now, Piranesi being an unreliable narrator, I found to be so interesting because it's not out of deceit. He's not trying to lie to us. It's because his memory is faulty, and this whole book explores the idea of memory and identity. Now, this book feels like a mix of a dream and a puzzle. It's slowly giving the reader more clues as to the nature of what's going on. And with only 7 chapters and a really great pace, this is a nice quick read that I haven't been able to stop thinking about, and I have heard that the audiobook is good as well, so I might need to give that a listen when I eventually reread this book. This is a brilliant piece of literature. Now, for this next recommendation, this is something that is so nostalgic to me. I watched the film adaptation of this book over and over again as a kid, and that is Kiki's Delivery Service by Eiko Kadono. Now, I never knew I didn't know this was based on like a famous children's story in Japan, but of course a lot of us are familiar with the Studio Ghibli adaptation, and my siblings and I would rent Kiki's Delivery Service and Spirited Away from Blockbuster over and over and over again. Like, we watched it so many times, and yes, Blockbuster, I'm sure I just unlocked waves of nostalgia for a lot of you watching. But for some reason, we just watched those two over and over again when I was really young. Then probably around the age of like 10 or so, then I discovered the other Studio Ghibli films, and I fell in love with like Princess Mononoke and Nausicaa Valley of the Wind, Howl's Moving Castle, and all the other ones. I think my favorite to this day is still Nausicaa, and maybe Princess Mononoke as well. I love those ones, but Kiki's Delivery Service is always going to hold a special place as one of those like foundational comfort films for me. Now the book actually got a new English translation just back in 2020, and I'm happy to say this is a very heartwarming and charming novel, and I feel like especially if you're a fan of the movie, then you really need to give the book a chance as well. Or if you're just looking for just a really lighthearted and cozy coming of age story, then you should read Kiki's Delivery Service. I will say it's definitely geared towards like young adult, middle grade, but I feel like adults can also really enjoy this book as well. I mean, it's got a lot of universal themes in there. Now, this one is definitely cozy fantasy by definition. It doesn't have some big grand plot, but sometimes the mundane mixed with a bit of magic and charm can be just as intriguing. The story follows a young witch named Kiki who sets out with her magical black cat Gigi to find a new town to serve. And after some trials, Kiki ends up starting a delivery business by using her ability to fly on a broom. And from there, she goes on a series of adventures and learns life lessons in the seaside town of Koriko. Now, one of the reasons I find this book to be very cozy and charming is kind of its episodic nature, how each chapter Kiki's presented with like a new challenge. Hidono's writing really focuses on self-discovery and independence and coming of age, but also on just the kindness of Kiki and how she kind of forms these bonds with the townsfolk. It's very much a wholesome read. For some reason, it made me really want like a novelization of Stardew Valley. But anyways, again, this is perfect for like any age. It kind of has that warmth and charm of like Anne of Green Gables. You can read it, you can share it with your kids. It's perfect for readers of all ages. And it's a great, light, uplifting novel to read in the autumn. It just so happened to be a cold October day when I picked up my very first Discworld novel by Terry Pratchett, and the book I chose was Mort. I still feel like this is a fantastic place to start with Discworld. Reading Discworld in the fall is completely unmatched compared to other seasons. Something about the fall just is the perfect time to read these books, especially if you're reading the Death books, which I would highly recommend. I'd recommend starting with Mort, then going through and reading the other Death books. Also the Witches books, those are perfect. The Witches books are perfect for the fall as well. And if you've never heard of Mort before, let me just read you the tagline, and I feel like you're gonna be interested. Death comes to us all. When he came to Mort, he offered him a job. After being assured that being dead was not compulsory, Mort accepted. However, he soon found that romantic longings did not mix easily with the responsibilities of being Death's apprentice. That's right, we're following a character that becomes Death's apprentice, and he kind of ends up messing up reality a little bit here and there, and Death goes on like a vacation and tries to experience what it's like to be human. Death is one of the most enjoyable characters throughout the Discworld books, and I really enjoyed reading Mort. It was such a memorable experience reading this in October. And Terry Pratchett is just a literary genius. I feel like he packs so much into his books. Now, I have seen some people that when they hear that Discworld is like a satire, they completely write it off. Don't be one of those people, okay? This being fantasy satire, that doesn't mean it doesn't have depth and purpose to it. Yes, it does. It also just has an incredible world, incredible cast of characters. I highly recommend checking out the Discworld books. I don't recommend starting with book 1, The Color of Magic. That's not really the best place to start with Discworld. There's multiple mini-series within Discworld, and once again, I'd either recommend starting with the Death books or starting with Guards, which is the start of the City Watch books. They're much better places to start than with The Color of Magic. The Color of Magic is still a good book, it doesn't really have the same tone and strengths as the other Discworld books. Discworld is such a comfort read for me. I always pick up one of these books when I'm just like overwhelmed by some of the other stuff I'm reading and I just want a break. So then I go and pick up a Discworld book, and Terry Pratchett never disappoints. Now, if you're looking for a richly atmospheric and gothic read for autumn, Titus Groan, the first book in Mervyn Peake's Gormenghast, is a perfect fit. Set in the sprawling, decaying castle of Gormenghast, this novel introduces you to this dark, labyrinthine world steeped in ritual, filled with eccentric characters, and dominated by the weight of tradition. Now, though the book follows the birth and early life of Titus Groan, the heir to Gormenghast, the true hero of the novel is the castle itself. It's described as a grand, almost living entity that influences every character within its walls. Now, Gormenghast has had a huge influence on my writing, and especially the setting of the fantasy series that I'm currently working on, and there's something just so mesmerizing about Mervyn Peake's writing style. Now, book 1 released in 1946, and Peake's prose is richly descriptive, it's highly stylized, and often compared to Dickens in its intricate character portraits. Honestly, in terms of like masterpieces, I would put this right up there with The Lord of the Rings. However, the language, it can be a little dense at times. I mean, it's a challenging read. It has long passages dedicated to the gothic grandeur of Gormenghast and its inhabitants. But the writing style, just like the castle itself, is something you can so easily get lost in. It's hard to not just get mesmerized and immersed in the descriptions, even of the most mundane things. And that's why, even though I feel like this is more of a challenging read, I never got bored of reading it. Now, Steerpike, a kitchen boy turned manipulator, he drives much of the novel's intrigue as he plots his way through the castle's twisted social order, but there's plenty of other standout characters as well, and they're some of the most unique and odd characters that I've read. Now, what makes Titus Groan an excellent autumn read is the mood that it evokes in the reader. I mean, it's bleak, but it's captivating, and it has this creeping sense of madness and melancholy pervading the story. The characters are a mix of grotesque and tragic, from the melancholic Lord Sepulcrave to the odd Lady Fuchsia. Each seems trapped within the crumbling stone walls just as much as they're bound by the endless and absurd rituals of Gormenghast. But everything's about to change with the long-awaited birth of an heir, Titus Groan. Now, if you are seeking a slow, immersive read that mirrors the decaying beauty of autumn, then Titus Groan and the rest of the Gormenghast trilogy offer such a surreal and just unforgettable experience. The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I don't know what it is about like dark, creepy circuses with like whimsical magic. Something about that is so appealing to me. I like the idea of circuses. Am I the only one, or am I just rambling here? I don't know how to describe it, but I always find circuses to be such like whimsical settings for fantasy. Even that part of the Wheel of Time that had like the circus, I loved that. And the Night Circus is just that. It's about a mysterious circus that appears without warning and only appears at night. I do remember when I read this quite a while back now, I did feel like I was let down a little bit by the plot. I don't know if I was just overhyped about the book, but I feel like there could have just been a bit more depth there to the plot and a little bit to the characters as well. I wish we got a little bit more there. But in terms of just like a book that has that sense of wonder and mystery, even if I feel like it's lacking in some areas, I feel like the heart of the Night Circus really is in that immersion. It's a book that wraps itself around you on a cold autumn night, and it's perfect for cozy evenings with a cup of tea. So if you're looking for a book that is rich in atmosphere and has some magical realism in there, you should read The Night Circus. And next we have Nettle Bone by T. King Fisher. This one is very much like a dark fairy tale, so it kind of has a bit of the creepy vibes, also some of the cozy vibes in there as well. It actually has a surprising amount of humor in it. This was such an enjoyable read. This was a recent read for me. In Nettle Bone, we follow Mara, a princess turned almost nun, who embarks on a quest to rescue her sister from the clutches of an abusive and cruel prince. With the help of a grave witch, a fairy godmother, a warrior, and a demon-possessed chicken, Mara sets out to save her family. Together, the 5 of them intend to be the hand that closes around the throat of the prince and frees Mara's family and their kingdom from its tyrannous ruler at last. This one is only 240 pages, and if you're looking for something that has kind of a Grimm's fairy tale vibe to it, this would be one of my top recommendations by far. I mean, this book is a really great mix of horror and humor, which is something you don't really see that often. Dragons of Autumn Twilight. This is book 1 in the Dragonlance Chronicles. This is the first book you should start with when diving into Dragonlance, and it's one of my favorites. I have so much nostalgia for this book. And obviously, you can tell by the title, it's a great book to read in autumn. These books are classic fantasy. They use a lot of tropes I love and some that I don't like, but they're so much fun. And I would really love to get back into reading Dragonlance at some point. I should even make some videos on it. Let me know if you're interested in seeing that. Did I already recommend a book by Susanna Clarke? Yes, I have. Is that going to stop me from recommending another? No, it's not. I need to recommend Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. This is such a great mystery novel and a perfect book to read during the fall. Is it just me, or is there something about like the Victorian era setting that's so perfect for the fall? I don't know, I feel like that's a thing, right? But this combines like the social commentary of like Jane Austen with magic, and it really is such a masterpiece of a novel. This is a chunky book as well, but the pacing is so great. It has a lot of that kind of slower pace of a Victorian era novel, but she manages to not make it boring ever. It was honestly really hard for me to put this book down, and usually I have a problem with getting through a book that is this thick, but it just felt like it was so masterfully done. Susanna Clarke is brilliant, and if you haven't read any books by her, I would recommend picking up Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. So what's it about? Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is a historical fantasy novel set in an alternate version of 19th century England, where magic once existed but has largely faded into myth. And the story follows 2 magicians, the reclusive and scholarly Mr. Norrell and the young charismatic Jonathan Strange, as they attempt to revive English magic. Now, I'm always ready to recommend Sabriel by Garth Nix. This is one of my favorite young adult series, and I think it deserves so much more attention. Sabriel is one of my favorite female protagonists of all time, and the world in this series is vast, mysterious, and beautiful. You only see a few locations in the first book, but you get a sense of the wilderness of the Old Kingdom. And basically, the Old Kingdom is like if the Pevensies went to Narnia and discovered it had been overrun by the undead 200 years ago. And it's up to the job of the Abhorsen, or in this case Sabriel, to control 7 bells to keep the dead asleep. Also, Mogget the Cat is amazing. I would highly recommend this series, and the audiobooks are fantastic as well. Tim Curry is the narrator. If you're interested in a good audiobook for the fall, then I would highly recommend this. Now, a huge part of the fall for me is nostalgia, and I don't know if it's because I allow myself to fall into nostalgia during this season, because I always find myself rewatching, like, Over the Garden Wall, or Are You Afraid of the Dark, or Goosebumps, or some other like Halloween episodes from TV shows I grew up with. There's a lot of nostalgia tied to this season for me, but obviously I need to recommend the Goosebumps books by R.L. Stine. This one was one of my favorites growing up. It's still one of my favorites, and that is Stay Out of the Basement. This was the first one that I ever read, and also it's the first episode of the TV show that I watched, and I recently like rewatched it and reread it, and it's still, I think, one of the best Goosebumps books there is. So this is always going to be a favorite for me. Now, obviously, reading these as an adult, they're not really that scary. They might have some creepy moments. They also just have a lot of great comedy to them, but I still find these books to be really enjoyable, especially if you just allow like your inner child to come out. You can really enjoy these books a lot. It feels like watching, again, like it feels like watching a Halloween episode from a TV show. And I mean, Goosebumps was like a phenomena of the 90s and early 2000s, and I feel like you couldn't go anywhere without seeing these in a Scholastic book fair. I kind of made this tradition where I try to listen to an audiobook for like 1 or 2 Goosebumps novels during the month of October. I don't do it every year, but in fact, I don't think I did it last year, and I don't know if I'm gonna get time to do it this year. But let me know in the comments which Goosebumps audiobook you think I should listen to. By the way, the audiobooks are actually really good for Goosebumps. So yeah, if you have a recommendation, let me know. The only ones I have listened to are Stay Out of the Basement, The Haunted Mask, The Curse of the Mummy, the like Egypt one, and oh, The Werewolf of Fever Swamp. And I feel like maybe there's 1 or 2 more, I just can't think of them right now. Those are the only ones I've like reread as an adult. So if you have any recommendations, let me know, and I might just get to them this October. And even if the 1995 show is corny and doesn't have the best acting, it's kind of a wide range of quality, I still find it so nostalgic. It reminds me of simpler times, and I love to watch the show as well. Let me know if you grew up with Goosebumps and which ones were your favorite. Now, obviously, I need to mention Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldry. Now, I actually am also going to recommend the sequel book, Bookshops and Bone Dust, as well. I feel like both of these are great to read during the fall. This is the coziest of cozy fantasy. It's got low stakes, but it's very emotional and has this really great kind of town setting. I love the descriptions of coffee here. Even just the smells of coffee is so descriptive in this book. Next up is a middle grade series you probably forgot existed or you thought would never be mentioned again, and that is The Edge Chronicles by Chris Riddle and Paul Stewart. Yeah, The Edge Chronicles. You probably thought this was like a fever dream, or that you were the only child that read these. Well, guess what? I read them too. And they're pretty good. I always remember being so intrigued at the bookstore when I saw these covers with these grotesquely odd-looking creatures and this really whimsical art style. Chris Riddle has such a unique art style. I really wish I read more of these growing up. I only read like a few of them, and I really enjoyed them. I think I read them out of order, actually. The very first one I read was this one, The Winter Nights. So this isn't book 1, but I enjoyed it a lot, and I went back and I read Beyond the Deep Woods, and I feel like I read a few others that were out of order, but they're so bizarre, and I never really see anybody talk about these books anymore. I don't know why. I know they came up with some new editions, but I still like these editions. I love the artwork by Chris Riddle and just how bizarre they are. And that's why I feel like it's a great read for October, because we have these really weird creatures on the covers, and just the world is so whimsical and magical. And I haven't read all these ones that I have here. I actually just found them at like a used bookstore for very cheap, and I decided to pick them up. Has anyone else read these books? I would like to know. Next is Uprooted by Naomi Novik. This is a very cozy book that is kind of a blend of like dark fairy tales. It's set in a village on the edge of an ominous, corrupted forest. And I don't know, evil forest vibes just screams autumn to me. I'm a big fan of Over the Garden Wall, and I just love those kind of autumn, creepy forest stories. And Uprooted is an excellent example of this. Last year, I recommended A Night in the Lonesome October, and I'm gonna recommend it again in case you missed that video, because this is perfect for October, considering the book is divided into chapters, each representing one night in the month of October. Now, this is a tale heavily influenced by H.P. Lovecraft, and the basic concept is that a variety of famous literary and historical figures and monsters are somehow all playing a mysterious game. It's all narrated from the quirky point of view of Snuff, a dog who happens to be Jack the Ripper's companion, and Jack is one of those figures involved in the game. There's a lot of other animal companions as well. It is such an interesting read, and you should definitely read it. Now, maybe you just want to go back and read some Tolkien. That's understandable. Tolkien's beloved classics, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, have become literary comfort food for readers around the world. And whether you're exploring the Shire's idyllic countryside or journeying through the ancient and mysterious forests of Middle-earth, Tolkien's vivid and detailed descriptions of nature are just really cozy. And sometimes it's best to just revisit a classic. Under the Whispering Door by T.J. Klune. Now this one is another one that is like cozy fantasy by definition, and it's also an emotional journey. The story revolves around Wallace Price, a cold and selfish lawyer who dies suddenly and finds himself at a strange way station for souls, a tea shop run by Hugo, a ferryman whose job it is to help the dead transition to the afterlife. However, Wallace, reluctant to move on, begins to question his past life. And in Klune's signature blend of humor and heart, we get this exploration of grief, redemption, regret, and love. And though it does deal with some of those heavy themes, it's also just a very light-hearted story. Even though some of the characters are like talking about death a lot, these characters all have this certain quirkiness to them. You kind of have to suspend your disbelief a little bit when it comes to the conversations and the characters' odd little quirks, but it was very enjoyable. I did feel like I wanted a little bit more by the end. I was hoping there'd be something a bit more profound to say, but overall it is still just a really cozy book that obviously, even just by the themes alone, is great to read during the fall. Redwall books span over 20 novels, and it is the quintessential cozy fantasy. These heartwarming tales of courage, friendship, and feasting are the ideal companions for the autumn season. Seriously, these books have some of the best descriptions of food. It's set in a vividly described medieval world inhabited by anthropomorphic animals. The Redwall series brings a sense of nostalgia and warmth. I read through a bunch of these growing up, and to be honest, they still hold up really well. The descriptions of the abbey, the surrounding woodlands, and the hearty feast within its walls evoke a cozy, inviting atmosphere, kind of reminiscent of fall gatherings. Now, while the Redwall books are undeniably cozy, they're also filled with action and adventure, whether it's defending the abbey from marauding vermin, embarking on perilous quests, or solving riddles. These tales of heroism and bravery, they just resonate with the spirit of the season. Now, usually I do like to recommend some Neil Gaiman books for the fall. They just feel so perfect for the fall, but I am incredibly disappointed with Gaiman and some of the recent allegations that have come out, and his response to them really is not that convincing. So yeah, I'm very disappointed in Gaiman. I do believe in putting the art before the artist. I think you can still enjoy somebody's art without, you know, agreeing with the actions of the artist. So I am going to recommend a few Gaiman books, but I will say that you should probably pick these up for free. Go to a library to pick them up, find them at a used bookstore, get them for free online in some way. But, you know, unless more details come out, I really don't think you need to support Neil Gaiman. Anyways, with that out of the way, I do want to recommend The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. This is one that is always so comforting to read during October. This, basically, in short, is The Jungle Book, but instead of a boy living with animals, it's a boy living with ghosts. And it's got the classical whimsicalness and charm that Neil Gaiman's writing is known for. The other one, of course, is Coraline. This one is a classic read for the fall as well. Now, when it comes to comfort reads, there's very few books that make me feel at home as much as the Harry Potter books do. I mean, I still love rereading these books every once in a while, and I enjoy them every time. I never get tired of reading them. It just feels like you're going home when you're going to Hogwarts, and there's something so magical about this series. I love the journey these characters go on. I love how whimsical they are. I love the humor that's in these books that doesn't really translate as much in the movies. And don't get me wrong, I love the Harry Potter movies, but there's actually a lot of humor in the books that didn't make it into the adaptations. And I know a lot of people try to complain about the inconsistencies in the wizarding world and how the world building doesn't quite make sense and how the time turner could have saved everything. I think some people get too caught up on building these hard magic systems and world building without realizing that not every book is trying to do that. I feel like Harry Potter is much more trying to do the Alice in Wonderland approach. It's much more like you're going down the rabbit hole and there's this whimsical magical world with things that might not quite make sense, but you're just going along for the ride. And I feel like that's how you're supposed to enjoy Harry Potter. And even with that being said, I mean, the wizarding world is still believable enough to have a bunch of movie adaptations do so well. And again, I love the movies. Now, this edition is the Mina Lima edition, which has all these really cool interactive elements that I feel like this is honestly one of the best editions of Harry Potter. But unfortunately, I found out that they canceled the Mina Lima editions now with the, what was it, the third one? So we're not gonna get the Goblet of Fire. We're not gonna get any of the others. So now I have these beautiful editions, and they're still like some of my favorite editions on my shelf. It's just so unfortunate that we can't get the full set of these editions because I would love to see all of them on the shelf and have all the spines match up. But anyways, I still think the interactive elements are so fun, especially if you're reading these to your kids or something. And those are some of my favorite cozy comfort reads for autumn. Make sure to tell me all of your favorites in the comments. Also, keep an eye out because I will be making a more spooky, scary themed recommendation video a little bit later this month. So if there are some spooky books you thought I should have included in this video, they might just be in the next video. Anyways, if you liked the video, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you really want to support the channel, the best way to do that is to support me over on Patreon. Huge thank you to all my patrons. You guys are amazing.